Day 4, 2 Peter 1, 3 and 4. Prepare. Psalm 24, 3 and 4. Who may ascend the hill of the Lord, and who may stand in his holy place? He who has clean hands and a pure heart. Before attempting to approach the presence of God, we must make sure we have clean hands and a pure heart. So begin today with a time of confession. Psalm 139:23. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me. Ask God to reveal any sins in your heart that you have not confessed. Then confess them and ask God to cleanse you. Seek his forgiveness, even as you forgive and release those who have sinned against you. Psalm 119:36. Turn my heart toward your statutes. Ask God to turn and incline your heart toward what he has for you in today's passage. Your deepest desire. Earnestness is the key to answered prayer. What is the deepest, most driving desire in your heart today? Cry out to God for that. Meditate. Today's passage reveals numerous attributes of God. An attribute is anything that is true about God. Some are stated directly, others are implied by the kinds of things God does. Allow the passage to paint a portrait of what God is like. Try to take in the whole portrait. 2 Peter 1, 3 and 4. His divine power has granted to us all things that pertain to life and godliness through the knowledge of him who called us to his own glory and excellence, by which he has granted to us his precious and very great promises, so that through them you may become partakers of the divine nature, having escaped from the corruption that is in the world because of sinful desire. How many attributes did you notice? Starts out with his divine power. That's an obvious one. God is powerful. He has granted to us all things. That's his generosity and the fact that he's the source of everything we need. Granted us everything that pertains to life. He's the source of life. Through the knowledge of him who called us, so everything we need comes by knowing him. Again, he's the source of everything. And he's personal. He's someone who can be known. He cares about us. He called us to his own glory and excellence. He invites us to participate with who he is. He is glorious. He is excellent. He makes promises. And those promises are precious and great. And through His promises, we become partakers of His nature. Again, shows that He invites us to participate with Him, welcomes us into His very self. And it's through that process that we escape corruption. Hold that portrait of God in your mind. Imagine a being like that, close by, just a few feet away, turning His face toward you right now and taking notice of you. Listen to the passage again, this time from the New English Translation. As you listen, imagine, as He turns His attention toward you, what sort of gestures, gifts, or communications would you expect would come from Him toward you? I can pray this because His divine power has bestowed on us everything necessary for life and godliness through the rich knowledge of the One who called us by His own glory and excellence. Through these things, He has bestowed on us His precious and most magnificent promises, so that by means of what was promised, you may become partakers of the divine nature, after having escaped the worldly corruption that is produced by evil desire. Don't forget, this God we're talking about is right there, within arm's reach, paying attention to you right now. Don't just analyze abstract thoughts about Him. Talk to Him about what He's saying to you in this passage. He's the one making you notice one thing or another. Now listen to God speak to you from the New Living Translation. By His divine power, God has given us everything we need for living a godly life. We have received all of this by coming to know Him, the One who called us to Him by means of His marvelous glory and excellence. And because of His glory and excellence, He has given us great and precious promises. These are the promises that enable you to share His divine nature and escape the world's corruption caused by human desires. What stood out this time? Notice that it is through God's great and precious promises that two things happen. First, you escape the corruption of the world caused by evil desires, and as a result of that, you participate in the divine nature. Perhaps a good goal for today would be to choose one of God's promises, and by trusting in and leaning on that promise throughout the day today, escape some corruption. Escape it by allowing God's promise to transform an evil desire so that you have greater participation in God's nature. Which promise would be a good one for today? Here's one you might consider. From Psalm 37:4, delight yourself in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart. Thank God for making the promise you chose, and ask Him to help you remember and trust in it throughout the day today. Ask God to bring to your mind someone He would like you to share these thoughts with today, whichever part of this meditation that stood out the most, or perhaps the promise you chose. Make a plan. When are you going to encourage that person? Pray for others, your pastor. Pray for your pastor. Ask God to enable him to see the portrait of God you saw today. And ask God to enable him to trust in the promise you chose. Consider sending your pastor a message reminding him of the promise and letting him know you prayed this for him. Pray the same for anyone else the Lord has laid on your heart today. Pray for the kingdom of God to come and for His will to be done on earth as it is in heaven. Thanksgiving. Close by delighting yourself in the Lord. Think again of the portrait of God you saw earlier. Zero in on a couple features of that portrait, one or two of God's attributes that have especially benefited you recently. Take delight in Him and express your gratitude. Take it with you. What can you use in the upcoming day to serve as memory cues to help you bring to mind the promise you chose at least twice more today?